now. Awesome. All right, guys. So for today, make sure your warm-up sheets are out. We have a warm-up on the board. Make sure we are looking at our map here. If you are having a difficulty reading the map, especially our keys, feel free to pull it up in Google Classroom under warm-up slides. Feel free to look at it there if you can't read what's up here, because understanding what's up here is going to help you understand that whole map. Answer those 3 questions, and then I will check back in with you guys in a couple minutes, and we will review through that material, all right? Yes?
It says it was from 328.
I didn't change the date.
Oops.
Teachers make mistakes, that's allowed.
We just make them publicly every day, all day.
Yes? Yes?
That's kind of cool. It's 4, 4, 24. Or no.
Think back to the map yesterday as well for this.
Mystery. I just realized that on April 2nd, it was a palindrome.
It's a palindrome throughout April, actually.
4424.
There's a bunch of them.
Oh, because
Where the date is the same backwards and forwards. It's not just yesterday. There's a number of them.
Like the second month, 22nd day of 2022. Yeah.
We'll go over.
A palindrome. Like race car is a palindrome.
Alrighty, let's bring it back together now. Awesome. Let's put computers away. We're not going to need them again today. Don't want them to be a distraction.
Oh, he needs a stick. He likes that yardstick.
Makes it easier to point to things.
Even though he's 6'4" and can reach the top of the screen.
Yes. So, looking at the map here, like I was just talking about, make sure similarly to a graph, with a map, first thing we should always do is read that key. So we see that anything filled in with black represents Soviet Russia. That checkered pattern is countries in the Soviet political, economic, and strategic bloc. Countries that support communism is what these represent. That would help and be aligned with the Soviet Union, that are going to be a part of the Warsaw Pact as well, which we'll look at tomorrow what NATO and the Warsaw Pact was. Lastly, countries in the white are countries under strong Soviet political pressure. So kind of surrounding countries around the Soviet Union that feel that pressure of the Soviet Union. They're not a part of and don't support the Soviet Union, but they're under a strong pressure from the Soviet Union, meaning that they have a potential to fall to communism. Lastly, we have the question mark countries, which are countries that are not yet decided. So they're not under a strong pressure from the Soviet Union, but they are also not aligned with the Soviet Union yet. Does the key make sense? Awesome. So then, moving forward, these are some of the questions you should, looking at a political cartoon, some of those questions that you should be thinking about anytime you're analyzing any source. So we see someone on this. So as a class, I think you all wrote this down. Who's the man pictured on the map?
Soviet Union.
Joseph Stalin. Or yeah, he's the leader of the Soviet Union, so that makes sense. But yes, Joseph Stalin is pictured on the map here. Like we talked about, Joseph Stalin, major player in World War II. We talked about him with the rise of dictators, his rise to communism, and his rise to power in the Soviet Union. He continues to stay in power even post-World War II, and is going to be an important figure in the Cold War era. We're going to be looking at Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union, especially in the early stages post-World War II. We're going to be talking about Joseph Stalin quite a bit. So, what is he doing on this map? Callie.
He's trying to like conquer a bunch of countries.
He's reaching out and he's planting these Soviet flags. So he's reaching out, he's trying to I'm not gonna say. What's gonna be his goal of this, Shane?
Expand like communism.
Exactly that. Joseph Stalin is looking to spread communism and is looking to basically spread out that Soviet pressure and that Soviet influence throughout the European continent. That he's back in the Soviet Union, but he's slowly yet surely picking up more and claiming more and spreading that communist ideals. What this is going to lead to is exactly what that Cold War tension is going to be. Is we're going to have Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union spreading communism, and then countries like the United States, Great Britain, and then France trying to prevent the spread of communism because they see the conditions in the Soviet Union and they see the problems with communism and they don't want Joseph Stalin to have as much control. So they're going to try and be limiting kind of that sphere of influence. Do we remember what spheres of influences were? I think we talked about them. We might not have. So that sphere of influence, think of it as basically a country has a certain amount of influence around the globe. That's their sphere of influence. So the closer countries are, they're a part of that country's sphere of influence. Does that make sense? Awesome. So the sphere of influence for the Soviet Union, their main is going to be spreading communism. The sphere of influence for countries like the United States, Great Britain, and France is going to be more in support of democracy, specifically just preventing the spread of communism. And that is exactly where we're going to be heading and where we're going to be in the next few weeks in this unit. So if you guys can put that warm-up sheet away, and then all you're going to need out is a pencil and those guided note sheets. But if you did not pick up the guided note sheets, they're in the back. And I'm going to slide over here. Everyone has those out. After. But yes. Well, yep. All right, so yeah, just as a reminder for you guys, for the guided notes, make sure we're following along and filling them out. The blanks should make sure we're putting those in. The other thing, I went through and kind of edited this PowerPoint a bit. There's going to be words in blue and words in red. Words in blue represent the Western world and countries that support democracy and don't want the spread of communism. Words in red represent the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. So the words in blue and the words in red don't always align with the blanks. I know sometimes that's how the guided notes are done, but for this, just remember, blue, Western world, red, communism. If you want to have two different colors or have like a blue and a red colored pencil, you can shade those in or write some of those words in that as well. It may be useful for you guys. So, and yeah, we're not, I know this is kind of a hefty note packet. We're not going through the whole thing today. About a little over half of it we're getting through. So, bear with me.
Communism is red. Red is almost always the color for communism. It's used a lot in Russia. Communist China has a lot of red. Red is sort of a power color too. And blue is often used. And you'll see maps or charts that often use blue for democracy, red for communism. You'll hear about the Red Army in communism too.
There, so.
Yeah.
So that first major key detail, Mrs. Drake just was talking about it. Red is going to be that main color for communism. So we'll see things referenced such as the Red Army, people referred to as Reds. All of those are in reference to communism. And those are that's kind of some of that vocabulary that we're going to be seeing throughout this unit. Is we're going to see the color red show up a lot. At the same time, the color blue and blues are going to show up a lot.
Can you guys see okay? Yeah, it's kind of small. Will your films still come out if we turn the lights off?
Put the lights off, we can see. I bet it will.
I'm gonna guess it will, but thank you, Tice.
Yep,
Is
you
that
can
a little
still see
better?
me.
I can check the phone and see.
It's
It
tiny.
worked.
He's
I
got
got it on my
his
watch.
Oh.
All right, thank you. Technical issue there.
Part of teaching. We roll with the punches.
That's right.
But yeah, so like I said, where we're heading, we just finished up World War II. So after World War II, there's devastation basically all across Europe. Devastation both economically, financially, which is economically. There were 50 to 70 trillion deaths worldwide, counting both the Axis and Allies powers. But specifically for the Americans, we're going to have 400,000 dead. So we suffered not as harsh as some of the Germans or the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and Russia suffered over 28 million deaths. So again, very similar to World War I. Russia and the Soviet Union were fighting throughout World War I. The United States gets involved late in World War I. Very similarly, World War II, the United States gets involved a little bit later. So we're going to suffer slightly less death as well. They aren't fighting as long. So the Soviet Union, they are going to suffer the most amount of deaths, like I said, that 28 million. And they continue to be united under the communist flag under Joseph Stalin as their ruler. Much like Europe, Japan also is going to lay in ruins both economically and physically as well. Their physical country physically is going to need rebuilt. Not only is their economy needing rebuilt, but physically it's going to need rebuilt. Thinking especially Japan, especially Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where the atomic bombs were dropped, and the surrounding areas of those are going to need rebuilt. These were countries that were suffering almost nightly bombing raids that need rebuilt. That over 5 billion cubic yards of rubble lay in Germany alone. So that's just, there's an image of some of that damage there. Other results of World War II, some of the major world powers at the time, militarily wise, Britain, France, Germany, and Japan. Following World War II, they're not going to be this great military strength anymore. So they're going to suffer defeats, especially in the case of Germany. They're suffering those heavy defeats. They've suffered, essentially, they lost both world wars. So those heavy defeats, they're not going to be that major world power following World War II. They're largely going to be focused on rebuilding. Same with Japan. and then Britain as well. What that's going to do is that's going to allow the United States to essentially begin that ascend to that major world power that we are today. It's going to come from this post-World War II world. So, also, following World War II, it's going to lead into the United States and the Soviet Unions are going to become two competing world powers. And we're going to see that competition between democracy and communism. Again, red and blue. Are we good to move to the next slide? Okay. So what we're going to have towards the end of World War II, which was talked about briefly if you were here the day before we went on break, but it was mentioned in that World Wars video, is going to be the Potsdam Conference. It's going to take place in 1945. It's going to be a meeting between the major Allied powers, so the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain, represented by President Truman for the United States, Joseph Stalin for the Soviet Union, and then Winston Churchill is going to be the leader of Great Britain. Again, you may be thinking, FDR was the leader for the United States during World War II. Why isn't he there? FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, does pass away midway through what was his fourth term in office. He's going to pass away. So President Truman, which was his vice president, is going to take over and be the president of the United States and be in charge of these peace agreements for World War II. One important thing to note here is largely they didn't want that harsh punishments and harsh restrictions put onto Germany. They saw what had happened with the Treaty of Versailles and didn't want that to happen again. They saw that that destroyed Germany and furthered them from recovery. That largely their main focus is going to be on Germany's recovery economically, and that's going to have an effect globally as well across Europe. That's going to lead to a recovered Europe economically. If they can recover Germany's economy, who was one of the hardest hit, the surrounding countries will recover as well. At the Potsdam Conference, this is going to be one of those very early stages of what's going to become the Cold War. Truman himself is going to be afraid of Stalin's influence and that spread of communism, and Stalin trying to spread communism across Europe. What are some of the conditions, thinking back to World War I, that allowed Hitler to spread Nazism? Mitchell?
Like, everyone was, like, the Great Depression was going on, and everyone was kind of desperate for, like, a leader.
People, the economy was in ruin. Physically, they were in ruin. Similarly, what just ended? What's in ruin across Europe right now? World War II. They're economically and physically in ruin, which is why Truman is afraid that Stalin may attempt to spread communism across some of these countries that are experiencing those heavy losses, because they're looking to rebuild. So what this is going to lead to is Germany being divided into 4 temporary zones of occupation, being administered by the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. So Germany is going to be divided in 4. Looking at the colors here, talk to your table groups, what do you notice about the division of Germany into 4 and those countries that are being divided? What's something that you notice?
It goes beyond just the number. More there than meets the eye.
All right, let's come back together here. What's one thing that you noticed? Let's hear from Frangia's group.
There's more democracies than communism.
Simply put, if this circle represents Germany and was divided into 4, here's the United States, France, Great Britain, which I'm just going to put GB, and the Soviet Union, which is the USSR. 3/4 democracy, 1/4 of which is going to be communist. So, Germany being divided, there's going to be more of a democratic presence than a communist presence. Christopher, yeah?
I've noticed that Britain and France are communist, right? So they probably have some influence.
That's one thing as well. Britain and France are going to be occupying Germany, but they also experience that financial and physical ruin. So they're going to be more focused on rebuilding themselves. What could that lead to then for the USSR or the Soviet Union?
The USSR might take its chance to take over Great Britain and force parts of Germany.
Exactly. That the Soviet Union sees the weakness of Great Britain and France and is going to try and expand that communism again into the rest of Germany. One of the reasons why that's not going to work out, though, is because this was the original plan, was to divide Germany into 4 and basically each country be in charge of occupying one section. What really is going to end up happening is that the United States, Great Britain, and France are going to unite their sections of Germany under democracy to prevent the spread of communism, and then the Soviet Union is going to be left with their quarter of Germany. What that's going to lead to is, if we think back to our maps from yesterday, I was hearing a lot of questions about East. Why is Germany split into East and West Germany? This is why. East Germany is going to be the United States, Great Britain, and France's side of Germany, and then West Germany is going to be held by the Soviet Union. Does that make a little more sense now? Awesome. Looking at this image here, who's this man here? Do we know? Stalin, who's in the middle? Truman, and then, Churchill's in here too. And then all their advisors as well are going to be in that picture. So that photo is from the Potsdam Conference itself. Following the meeting, they all met together. It's probably one of the very few photos that you're going to see of Truman and Stalin together from this era.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting that Stalin was on the Allied side, and now he's gonna go right back to being against us. Remember, he started off as an ally of Hitler's, but Hitler went back on his promise and took all of Poland instead of just half. But now, here we go, the war is ending, and Stalin is gonna wind up back being a dictator, trying to spread communism, and not on our side, not on the side of democracy.
They had colored pictures back then.
Starting to. Sometimes they colorize them afterwards, but yeah. they did.
So further thing about the Potsdam Conference as well, Joseph Stalin is going to want that revenge on Germany. They're going to seek heavy reparations, and they're going to try and get that same thing that happened with the Treaty of Versailles of heavily punishing Germany. Churchill and Truman are going to remember what had happened with the Treaty of Versailles and advise against that. And then in the end, they're going to end up with a settlement, which is just an agreement that Stalin would be able to get some of the reparations he wanted, but in return, he had to give back some food and supplies to the German people in aid to rebuild. So they're not doing what happened after World War I of just basically slapping Germany with a giant bill and going, pay it. They're offering supplies to help rebuild, but still demanding those reparations, which is kind of that agreement that they're going to come to at Potsdam Conference. Also, a major important thing to remember about the Potsdam Conference is this is where Truman is going to first learn of the successful test of the atomic bomb that had been the Manhattan Project and the test of nuclear weaponry. Truman is going to share that information with Stalin because that's going to help lead to the end of the war in the Pacific. Stalin is going to feel threatened by this and bullied into accepting this deal because the bomb had been developed. So Stalin is going to view that as a threat. Like, if you don't comply to this, we have this weaponry now, and we're not afraid to use it, kind of. This very thing is going to be what creates that tension between the United States and the Soviet Union in the Cold War. As the Cold War is going to be all about nuclear weapons and building up that armor, and who's stronger than who, essentially. And they learned about that at Potsdam. Again, here's another photo from Potsdam. There's Churchill. Churchill, Truman, Stalin. Churchill is the leader of Great Britain. And then are we good to move on? Has anyone had about Potsdam Conference, any questions from there? Awesome. So, what we're going to be left with after Potsdam, like I said, that was the initial talks of how are we going to settle this. So the United States is going to come up with the Marshall Plan, which is going to be after World War II. Basically that plan of how are we going to rebuild Europe economically and physically. The Marshall Plan is going to be what that plan was. It's going to come out in 1947. It's going to be that plan of this is how the United States is going to help rebuild Europe. The goal of it is to restore a working economy and fight against hunger, poverty, and harsh conditions for the civilians. And basically rebuilding of the economy, providing jobs, food, housing, and getting the country rebuilt physically and financially. This aid is going to be offered to the Soviet Union. However, the Soviet Union is going to refuse its help and is going to restrict its Eastern European allies or satellite nations from accepting aid as well. Based off what you guys already know and kind of the things we have already talked about, again, talk in those table groups about why you think the Soviet Union refuses the help. Oh, color pencils? My bad.
Oh, was that a colored pencil? Oh, there's handhelds back there. Sorry.
All right, let's come back together.
Got a new 2 pencils back there.
Let's bring it back together, y'all. Someone from Jordan's groups, tell me what you guys are thinking.
He said to make him like look bad, but also make him look like
Exactly. The Soviet Union doesn't want themselves to look weak, and they also don't want communism to look weak. So that's going to be one of the primary reasons as to why the Soviet Union is going to decline this aid, is they don't want themselves to look weaker. They also don't want democracy to begin to being spread, which is why they're going to restrict those satellite nations. A satellite nation is basically just a nation that is a part, it's those maps that support communism, and we're not a part of the Soviet Republic, is what those satellite nations were. So they don't want to look weak, and they also don't want their satellite nations receiving that aid, because if the satellite nations receive the aid, they may begin to support the Western ideals and democracy more than they're going to support those communist ideals. Because the Soviet Union isn't going to be providing much of that aid to help rebuild that the United States was offering. In total, the United States is going to end up contributing over $13 billion in aid under the plan, and it was named for the U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall who crafted it. Yes?
Was it $13 billion like now or back then?
I believe it was, that's going to be it from the time period.
Yeah.
Yeah, 13 billion, so it would be more in today's currency because inflation is higher.
Yeah, it would be close to $1 trillion, I think. It's a lot of money. You guys, Berlin itself, like, because the Russians were bombing Berlin from the east, and we and the British were bombing from the west. It took 9 months just to clear the rubble out of Berlin from the damaged buildings. Just to do that. Not even to begin to rebuild. Literally concrete everywhere. So.
Right, and then if you guys think back to the battle notes we did, you saw some of those photos from the Battle of Britain. That was the conditions that was affecting Great Britain. They also had that rubble throughout their streets. And like I keep saying, they have to build physically and financially, because they do. They have to literally rebuild that country.
Yep. And really the question you're dealing here with, and I know I'm intruding on Mr. Hardy's lesson, but we do this for each other. Really the question you're dealing with is, do you let the countries flounder like they did after World War I, and instead of falling to Nazism, they might fall to communism because they're looking for a savior? Or do you rebuild them, try to rebuild them stronger so they don't fall to a dictator like Hitler or Stalin? That's all.
Okay. And then these are this is going to be our last 2 slides of the day. As you may be thinking, who's going to be responsible for helping rebuild these countries and ensuring peace? This is where the creation of the United Nations are going to come in. The United Nations and the League of Nations, 2 different things. The League of Nations is what came up after World War I that failed. The United Nations is going to come out after World War II, and it's going to be more successful. The United Nations is still around today. So the United Nations has the same goal that the League of Nations did of being that world peacekeeping organization. The purpose, their purpose statement is still the same today, is to bring all nations of the world together to work for peace and development based on the principles of justice, human dignity, and the well-being of all people. So, simply put, the United Nations, its goal is to keep peace around the globe and make sure countries are treating civilians humanely. Now, initially it's going to have 51 member countries, and its headquarters is going to be in New York City. Why do you think they wanted to put the headquarters of the United Nations in New York City, Christopher? It's far away from Europe. That's one thing. The United States was the least damaged of. Also, who didn't join the League of Nations? Thinking back to World War I, the United States. So by putting the headquarters in the United States, what does it force the United States to do? Yeah, that's why they put it in New York. Basically, they're like, this failed without you, so we're going to headquarter it right here, so you have to join. So.
Wait, is it still in New York City?
There are headquarters
Yeah.
that still.
It's beautiful. It's a pretty building. It's kind of a roundish building, and it's got the member flags all the way around it. So if you ever go to New York City, it's a kind of a cool place to visit.
Graydon and then Kathleen.
So United Nations is not like NATO?
No, 2 different things. We'll look at NATO is going to be the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Those are going to be the countries united for democracy. And I'll explain more about that in the later lessons. Tomorrow we'll look at that. the United Nations is going to be a world peacekeeping body. So this is going to include all countries, or the goal to include all countries.
Yes, and they don't have a standing army. It's a peacekeeping organization specifically.
Kathleen, what was your question?
Why didn't they put it in the state capital?
Likely New York. One, it's off the coast, so it's easier to get to by boat. Again, we don't have the most reliable planes back in this area, so it's easier to transport. That's where more of the ports are. As well, you don't want necessarily a world peacekeeping organization stationed in a nation's capital, because the goal is that all countries are equal in the United Nations. But if you headquarter it in a capital of one country, that's kind of saying this country holds more of an importance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and New York is another one of our big, cities, so it's a good choice for one, for the location.
Josh and then Callie.
So for the last blank, it says today, blank country belong, but you can see it on the slides.
That's gonna be on the next slide. I have one more slide on the League of Nations. Kelly?
Also, if you had it like the capital, and they like tried to like take down the League of Nations, would it not like destroy the whole capital and then like the whole country eventually?
That is a possibility as well that you face, that if the United States falls and the capital gets taken, what happens to the United Nations? That is a problem that could be faced as well. So again, all those reasons are why they didn't put it in a country's capital, but still put it in a major United States city.
Yeah, and they still meet once a year. You'll see it on TV. You'll see that the meeting of the United Nations is gonna happen. They'll meet, there's a council that meets for emergencies too, with 5 main member countries. But every year, all countries meet in the New York building to discuss world issues.
There's photos of the United Nations.
United Nations. They do all the countries in the United Nations once a year, and then the Security Council meets more regularly, which is a group of, I think, actually 6 nations now.
So ignore that last blank about today, however many countries are in there, because it's not in here. I'll look it up and I can give you guys that number though.
What's missing?
They have today blank countries belong, but it's not on the slides. I thought I had another slide.
Oh,
but no.
here, I'll look at it for you.
Thank you. But yeah, here's some of the photos of the League of Nations headquarters. Not League, United Nations. You're gonna catch me doing that quite often, probably, hopefully not. But yeah, it is like she was saying, that big round building right off that coast. There we go. The League of Nations. United Nations. That's going to be one of the initial pieces that come out for the United Nations. The United Nations fight for freedom. So again, it's showing all the country members and kind of that devastation that they're fighting against. They don't want that.
Yes, there's the pretty building I talked about. It's 193 member nations. 193 currently.
There we go. And that is where we're going to stop today. We'll pick up with the rebuilding of Japan. Flick the lights on for me.
At least one. Thank you guys. Our door and light extraordinaire. It's a tough job, isn't it?
Yes. All right, so what just got passed out to you now is a reading on the Iron Curtain. So if you guys can also at this time pull out the map that you did yesterday. I'm gonna pull mine up as well. That's not the right one. Alright guys, give me 1 second to pull it up. So what the Iron Curtain is, I'm going to give you a little bit of precursor before I have you guys read this. This is going to load. Awesome. So what that Iron Curtain is you guys put it on your map right there, was that red dotted line. What do you notice about the countries to the east of the red dotted line? So towards the Soviet Union, what do you notice? Xavier.
Like all the countries that belong to the Warsaw Pact.
And the Warsaw Pact supports what? Communism. What do we notice to the west, heading towards the Atlantic Ocean? Graydon.
All the countries belong to NATO.
All the countries belong to NATO, and NATO is in support of what?
Democracy.
Democracy. So, what this Iron Curtain is it's that divide between the Soviet Union and their sphere of influence and their spread of communism, and then to the west, those countries that support democracy. That borderline specifically, much like I just talked about, is going to be that division between West Germany and East Germany. Looking at your map, what do you notice about the size of West Germany versus the size of East Germany? London.
West Germany is a lot bigger than East Germany.
Yeah, West Germany is significantly larger, and that's again because the United States, Great Britain, and France united all three parts of Germany that they had and formed West Germany. In the reading, it's going to talk about why East Germany and West Germany formed. So, what I'm going to have you guys do for the rest of class is I'm just going to have you guys read through the reading, and here I want you guys in your groups, similarly to how we did the station activity, where we had one person reading, one person annotating. It's going to work similarly to that. I'm going to have, wait for me to finish instructions. Essentially, the first half of the reading, I want one person reading. The second half, somebody else. And then the other two people highlighting those key details. And then you'll share that information with the people that was reading. Real quick, one last thing, guys. One last thing. Those key details, things like dates, vocabulary, communism, East Germany, why it formed, causes, things like that. That's what you should be highlighting. Don't highlight the whole page, please. But yeah, so you're reading and highlighting, and that will take us to the end of class, and we'll start tomorrow with the questions that correspond with this, all right? Read and highlight.
Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones after the war. Occupation zones are parts only that are controlled by another country. In Germany, one zone was controlled by Great Britain, one by the United States, one by France, one by the Soviet Union. East Germany was divided into zones controlled by the Soviet Union.
I was, there was one that I was like, okay, and I had that question, so I was like, I need to lead into it.
This is how we describe it. From setting, south,
Yes.
Adriatic,
I have been told that.
across the continent. For a minute, just try to picture a current made of iron. It would be near the right type of fabric that makes it heavy. An iron curtain would be so heavy and so solid that it would be impossible.
And yes, I intentionally used the yardstick for this filming. I wasn't getting into it, I'm like, I guess I see this.
I was gonna incorporate a rubber chicken, but I didn't want to do that to you.
Became known as the Iron Curtain. As the disobedience between communism the Iron Curtain was the dividing line of the conflict that was called the Cold War.
No, it's never ready.
He could thank them. Lemon Larry. Form successfully. Communism has forced labor and thrown in prison for not following
You guys have any questions about the reading? Are you noticing that on the map that way, that iron curtain, and kind of why, how, what it represents? Does this map make more sense now? Awesome. I told you I have a method to my madness. Okay, so yeah, this map will continue. Basically, this is very much. This is towards the middle of the Cold War. We're going to see where this map is going to play in. We started with it was the best one I had, and it led into this lesson as well. So it is basically that whole Cold War dynamics. That
Mr. Hardy is the best teacher ever.
Between communism and democracy is really what we're going to see, and it's going to make even more sense tomorrow when we talk about NATO and Warsaw Pact as well. So. You guys have any questions about the reading? Awesome. It's remote basically. Because that's what I can make sure it doesn't stop recording. Because I've heard horror stories about that. But looking at those maps that we did yesterday, it's starting to make a little more sense what the map represents and what we're looking at. Okay, that's what I was hoping. And then, like I said, we'll look at what and why NATO and the Warsaw Pact were made. We'll look at that tomorrow as well. So I know there's still some unfamiliar words, but it's coming. You guys have any questions about the reading? Awesome. Is the map making more sense now as well with that? Awesome. Yes. The American Home Front Station, it is in Google Classroom. Okay, I'll go through it. It may be tucked in the graded folder. I'll check it after class. I'll get back with you tomorrow. Okay?
There's something.
That's all the talk about. I'm going to look through right now. I got a little bit of time actually. The chickens say it's time to pack up, guys.